David stood at Madam Josephine's door, his heart racing as he prepared to confront her. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with the remnants of her dark power. The night sky above was eerily calm, the stars hidden behind ominous clouds. This was no ordinary evening, and David could feel the dread building inside him. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Madam Josephine's haunting figure. She was dressed in a flowing black robe, her eyes glimmering with a dangerous mixture of desire and fury. "David," she whispered, stepping closer, "I knew you would come. You cannot resist what we have." David took a deep breath, his voice steady but defiant. "I'm not here for you, Josephine. I've come to end this madness." Her face twisted with rage, her once beautiful features distorted by the darkness that had taken hold of her. "Madness?" she hissed. "You dare call my love madness? After all I've done for you? You owe me, David. I've sacrificed everything for you." David forced himself to remain calm, standing tall. "Madam Josephine, you need to end this." She tilted her head, a wicked smile curling on her lips. "End this? You can't end what I've started. You belong to me, David. No one else can give you what I can." David shook his head, and his gaze hardened, refusing to be swayed. "No, I don't belong to you. I don't owe you anything. You've manipulated me, twisted my life, and tried to control me. I'm not yours, and I never will be. You can't control me anymore." Madam Josephine's smile faltered, and her eyes darkened. And for a moment there was silence. The silence was deafening. Then, with a sudden, unnatural speed, Madam Josephine's hand shot out, grabbing David's wrist. Her grip was ice-cold, her fingers unnaturally strong. "You don't understand, David," she whispered, her voice low and menacing. "I've given everything for you, David, and I've bound your soul to mine. My wealth, my life, my heart. And you think you can just walk away? You cannot escape me." Her voice grew sharper, more desperate. "You'll never be free of me. I've tied your soul to mine. Without me, you're nothing." David felt a surge of anger rise within him. "Yes, I agree. I'm not nothing, and I don't need you," he said firmly. "I have Maria, my family, my own life. You can't take that away from me." David wrenched his hand free, stepping back as he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "You're sick, Josephine. You need help." A twisted smile spread across her face. "Help? No, David. It's you who needs help. But no one can save you now, not even her." At that moment, David felt the full weight of the darkness that surrounded Madam Josephine. It was no longer just her obsession, it was something far more sinister. There was a malevolent presence lurking behind her eyes, something ancient and evil that had taken hold of her soul. David quickly went down to his knees, and fury in his eyes he screamed, hitting the floor with his fist as he uttered the following words: "Never will I have anything to do with you. I reject you. May the gods of my fathers, and he that reigns supreme over all mankind, fight for me." David rose from the floor, with menacing and determined fury in his eyes, and walked away. For the first time, Madam Josephine looked uncertain. The power she had held over him for so long was slipping away, and she knew it. "You've made a mistake," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You'll regret this." But David stood his ground, refusing to back down. "No, Madam Josephine, it's you who will regret this." The confrontation with David left Madam Josephine unhinged, her mind unraveling as she spiraled deeper into her obsession. She returned to her mansion, but it was no longer the grand estate it once was. Shadows danced on the walls, and strange whispers echoed through the halls. In her desperation, Madam Josephine turned to darker forces, seeking out forbidden rituals that promised eternal youth and power over David's soul. She lit candles made from human fat and recited ancient incantations, calling on spirits long forgotten. Her once luxurious home became a shrine to the supernatural, filled with grotesque statues, blood-stained altars, and eerie symbols carved into the walls. But with every spell, with every act of dark magic, something within her changed. Her once beautiful face began to wither, her skin sagging and turning ashen. Her eyes, once full of life, grew sunken and hollow like the eyes of the dead. She had sold her soul for power, but now it was consuming her from within. The villagers began to notice strange things happening around the mansion. At night they heard screams, chilling, blood-curdling screams that echoed through the hills. Some claimed to see figures moving in the windows, dark, twisted shapes that didn't belong to this world. Others reported that the land around the mansion had turned barren, the once fertile soil now lifeless and cursed. David, too, began to feel the effects of her dark magic. He had nightmares every night, visions of Madam Josephine reaching out to him from the shadows, her hands covered in blood. In his dreams, she whispered his name, begging him to return to her. He woke up drenched in sweat, feeling her presence even in his waking hours. Maria grew more worried with each passing day, her once strong faith shaken by the malevolent force that seemed to haunt David. She sought the help of the priestess again, desperate for a way to protect him from Madam Josephine's evil. But the priestess warned them both. The darkness that has taken hold of her is ancient and powerful. She will not stop until she has consumed everything. David knew he had to end this once and for all. The battle was no longer just about him. It was about breaking the hold Madam Josephine had on his life, his family, and his future. He returned to the priestess, asking for a way to sever the dark bond that had tied him to Josephine. "There is one final ritual," the priestess said, her voice grave. "But it is dangerous. You must confront her in the place where her power is strongest, her mansion. You must destroy the source of her strength." David steeled himself, knowing this was his only chance. That night, he made his way back to Madam Josephine's mansion, armed with the knowledge and protection the priestess had given him. The mansion loomed before him, more terrifying than ever, its windows dark and lifeless, like the eyes of a corpse. Inside, Madam Josephine waited. She had sensed his approach, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "You've come back to me," she whispered, her voice echoing through the empty halls. "I knew you couldn't resist." David stepped into the grand foyer, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows on the walls. He could feel the presence of the spirits Madam Josephine had summoned, dark, twisted beings that hungered for his soul. But David was not afraid. He had come prepared. With trembling hands, he began the ritual the priestess had taught him. He recited the ancient words, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. The air around him crackled with energy as the spirits howled in rage, sensing their impending doom. Madam Josephine appeared before him, her once beautiful face now a grotesque mask of decay and madness. "You can't do this," she snarled, her voice filled with fury. "You belong to me." But David didn't stop. He completed the ritual, and in that moment, the mansion trembled. The walls began to crack, and the floor beneath them shook as if the very foundation of the house was being torn apart. Madam Josephine let out a blood-curdling scream as the dark spirits she had summoned turned on her. They swirled around her, pulling her into the darkness she had embraced for so long. Her body convulsed, and her once strong voice became a pitiful wail as the spirits devoured her soul. David watched in horror as Madam Josephine was consumed by the very power she had sought to control. Her body withered, turning to ash before his eyes. The mansion collapsed around him, the dark magic that had once sustained it now gone. And in that moment, David knew it was over. The bond had been broken. He was free. David stood amidst the ruins of Madam Josephine's mansion, the cold night air filling his lungs. The battle was finally over, but the cost had been great. The memories of what had transpired here would haunt him for the rest of his life, but he had made his choice. He chose freedom, he chose Maria, and he chose to leave the darkness behind. As he walked away from the ruins, David felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The nightmares would fade in time, and he would rebuild his life. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. Madam Josephine was gone, her obsession having destroyed her in the end. And now David could move forward, free from her grasp, and free to live the life he had always wanted, with Maria and without fear. David, he found solace in the simplicity of his life. He returned to his family, stronger and more grounded than ever before. The bond between him and Maria deepened, their love solidified by the trials they had endured. David had learned an important lesson, that true happiness couldn't be bought or forced. It had to be built on trust, love, and mutual respect. And that was exactly what he and Maria had. In time, the village moved on from the scandal, and life returned to normal. David and Maria built a life together, far removed from the darkness that had once threatened to consume them. And though the memory of Madam Josephine lingered like a distant storm cloud, David knew he had weathered the worst of it. He had survived the storm, and in the end, he had found what he had been searching for all along: love, happiness, and freedom. The battle was over, and David had won. Years passed, and Madam Josephine's mansion stood empty, a relic of her former life. The villagers often spoke of her in hushed tones, wondering what had driven her to such madness. Some said it was her loneliness. Others believed it was the curse of unrequited love. David no longer thought of her often. His life was full, his heart content. But every now and then, as he walked past the crumbling gates of her old estate, he would feel a chill in the air, a reminder of the battle he had fought and won. In the end, Madam Josephine's obsession had consumed her, leaving her alone in the ruins of her dreams. And David, having escaped her clutches, had found the one thing she could never possess: peace.
Follow this page or subscribe to this channel for more stories.